Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and today we're assessing why China adopts increasingly aggressive measures against the US dollar by utilizing the digital yuan. Now, the reason we're putting this out again with a different title is because the title seemed to have caused all manner of confusion. Unfortunately, what doesn't help is people make assumptions about what the title is without actually listening to the content. Now, anyone who knows us and has done so for years knows we have a very different perspective than most people on everything. That's why we advise you to listen. And then if you have any questions or comments, please get in touch, leave them on YouTube, and we'll address them. Because it's extremely important that people don't jump to conclusions based on the content and then decide they're not going to listen, or when they have listened, they still don't understand our perspective on it. So appreciate this very much, and obviously we'll continue with the podcast. Thank you. But first, we have to put a bit of context as to what the motivation for doing this is. It may seem obvious, but in fact, it goes back to Trump 1.0, when the first Trump administration tried to put tariffs in place on Chinese goods, where it tried to sanction Chinese companies and start some kind of quasi-trade war back in those days. When that happened, China made a number of strategic decisions. One of them was to become self-reliant in technological terms and to advance what many see as the next technological industrial revolution, to implement trade diversification, precisely because of the actions of the United States. And nothing has changed in those intervening 7 years or so. In fact, it's grown exponentially. And now, during Trump 2.0, because the US is looking at these broader tariffs, they're also, to some extent, looking at economic decoupling. And China feels they may try and curb their currency or financial flows. Therefore, Beijing's argument, quite legitimately from their perspective, is they want to develop a robust payment system with their friends, their partners, and to further diminish its ties with the United States. The belief inside China is that Trump 2.0 has basically taken their relationship to the end of the line. If something doesn't give with these tariffs, and China believes, well, maybe we can resolve this problem, but in 6 months, a year, there'll be another problem and another problem after that. Because the United States, of course, his problem with China is it doesn't like it being an ascendant power. It doesn't like the idea that China could be technologically more advanced than it is, and it's terrified, even though US hegemony is dead, that it will have to acquiesce hegemony to China, even though China, of course, has no interest in hegemony. So whilst the United States is proposing all these tariff proposals and measures, note Beijing wants the idea we have to be more inclusive. We all have to work together, win-win cooperation, real multilateralism, real globalization. But China stands on the cusp of major financial reforms, and they do believe that tariffs are really the first policy tool the United States will try to employ with them. And if it fails, which it will, then they may start to use other tactics against China and other countries, including in the realms of monetary and financial considerations. Now, there's no doubt China has big ambitions to be a financial powerhouse and they've been working and developing for a number of years in areas related to financial regulation, markets, financial institutions, oversight, services, products, and financial infrastructure. I mean, we've discussed this for many occasions on my own podcast and to some extent on YouTube. So they're looking, obviously, at developing ongoing breakthroughs in financial policies and the fundamental desire of the financial sector. And the big difference is that has to serve the real economy and achieve China's desire for what they term high quality development. It is not there to serve the interests of the financial sector, whose only goal is to develop financialization, which is nothing to do with the real economy. That's a huge mistake the West makes, not just the US. That's the big difference in what China's doing. So obviously China will continue to make these changes and developments to accelerate this reform. And they also, as part of that, want to advance financial openness. But they, of course, have to balance the risks of doing this because they don't want their markets to be subject to the United States trying to destroy them. If you open them too quickly, too soon, there is a risk the United States could try to do that. And that's something that's not spoken about, but it's factually correct. But all the while, China wants to become this global financial powerhouse. They want to attract global institutions to invest in Chinese financial assets and encourage greater investment across the board, but including, of course, China's financial markets. So with that in mind, obviously, if you want to have this huge advancement in opening up China's financial sector and make it into a financial powerhouse, part of that, of course, is going to be driving the internationalization of the yuan, raising its cross-border payments, financing, investment opportunities. So what they will have to do is strengthen ties with offshore markets. They're also going to have to accelerate the development of financial centers within China that have access to international markets. Yes, they have Hong Kong, of course, which is the offshore version of China as opposed to the onshore version. They need to open up their financial markets. They need to develop also a whole raft of offshore renminbi products. But it's worth noting in terms of the adoption of the yuan, how much it's growing. China's central bank, the PBOC, is really focusing on its digital yuan, and this is why we're mentioning this today, and SIPs to drive the adoption of the yuan for cross-border settlement purposes. Now, in 2024, year on year, China's SIPs payment network grew over 40%. SIPs stands for cross-border interbank payment system. That's obviously China's yuan international payment network. It processed 175 trillion yuan in 2024, and as we said, up over 40%. Beijing's goal is to grow global adoption of the RMB. They're not going to sit there and say, well, we want to try and defeat the dollar. They will defeat the dollar by virtue of what they're doing. They're still ultimately, their goal is to internationalize the yuan and reduce the level of influence the dollars have because of all the weaponization, etc., and imposing sanctions, regime change methods, everything the US has tried to do in weaponizing and abusing the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. So Beijing will aim for more deals using RMB in the likes of energy, in commodities. So it wants to push RMB denominated commodity deals, and it wants RMB payments in sectors where it increasingly continues to take a more significant position. Hong Kong will play a role in this. Beijing has already dozens of deals to use local currencies instead of dollars. But this is where the digital yuan can be used in a capacity to weaponize its position against the US dollar. Because not only will the adoption of this weaken the status of the dollar, but Trump's trade war will obviously create a lot of opportunities for the adoption of the digital yuan, which is obviously being developed by the Chinese central bank. So if you look at China's role of this huge technological innovation, that will enable the digital yuan to rival the dollar in ways many people have yet to understand or C, and massively reduce the dependence on US denominated cross-border payment systems. So as the problems with the United States worsen, and they're probably likely to, we have to hope they don't. And while China's got this huge technological innovation, and when we set this against the backdrop of the huge change in global supply chains we've witnessed since the pandemic, the innovations of the digital yuan cross-border settlement system would be deemed to be a weapon for China to challenge US dollar hegemony, what's left of it, and shape a new currency trade system. Now, is it a coincidence that in a matter of weeks after Trump launched this Liberation Day with respect to tariffs, which was on April the 2nd, Chinese authorities unveiled major initiatives, which was to accelerate the adoption of the digital yuan for cross-border payments. Among them is not just the status of Hong Kong, which we've discussed many times previously, but also to utilize Shanghai as being another center of international finance to drive the usage of the digital yuan. Most of these opportunities initially will go to Belt and Road partners. More than half of China's trade is now with these countries, ASEAN countries being one of them. And Beijing therefore has many possibilities to extend and internationalize the yuan. The digital yuan is the technology they want to utilize in this regard. And we've discussed the digital yuan technologically before. I don't want to repeat ourselves because people can listen to that in previous podcasts. But what they're essentially doing is saying we've had enough of the United States' behavior. We're sick and tired of them trying to bully us. This has been going on, well, before 2018, but principally during Trump 1.0. It kind of it diminished a little bit, but there was no new initiatives in the Biden administration. In fact, in some ways, they tried to cooperate more with the Chinese, and now we're back to Trump 2.0, where the whole emphasis is on actually wanting to sort of challenge China to find ways to create a situation where they think China should turn its back on 25 years of developments and embrace a Western consumption economy model, which they'll never do. And in return, China has to sacrifice all the technological advancements it's made in the last 20 years. And the United States has to be the dominant tech partner in the world, and you all just hoover up the crumbs that the United States wants to throw your way. China will never agree to that. This is why it doesn't believe resolving this tariff debacle is going to change the overall relationship between the two countries, because they might get over this problem, although that's highly debatable. And what will happen is there'll be something else in 6 months, because at the end of the day, the United States is deeply worried about the developments going on in China. They're very concerned about China's economic growth. They're very worried about the internationalization of the yuan. They've even made public statements to that effect from time to time. And therefore, China will see this as an opportunity to say, well, we're not exactly going to attack the dollar, but we're going to reduce its usage globally by giving people this alternative to use the digital yuan. And we'll develop it with Belt and Road partners, and eventually they will develop its usage with Europe and just about most of the world in the process. That is going to have a massive impact on the dollar, never mind all the problems that the United States has currently and all the issues we've discussed on other recent podcasts to do with the US dollar, US Treasury complex. So I think this is a very important subject. It's not something that's discussed very often. The digital yuan is poorly understood, which is a shame, because I think people, if they better understood it, would also realize why there's a lot of resistance in the West about the digital yuan, the central bank digital currency, because they want people in the West to view this as some form of Chinese control, of China trying to effectively impose its will on the rest of the world. This is why you hear a lot of claims about CBDCs, because China was the one that was out the gate first. China's the one that's got the most developed one. And they think it's a very good idea to convince people that China's intentions are nefarious, and therefore you don't want anything to do with this, because they'd like the idea the rest of the world will turn its back on the digital yuan and not utilize it in international trade. And also, of course, people will be able to utilize it in the future if they go and visit China as tourists or any other capacity. So that is part of the reason for a lot of claims being made with respect to the digital yuan, and people need to be extremely mindful of the fact that this in the West is more than anything else a propaganda exercise to get people to believe that in fact the digital yuan is something no one should adopt. Well, we've explained today why the world will want to adopt it and why this poses a major challenge to the US dollar, and therefore why China now, because it's reached the end of the line with the United States, wants to weaponize the digital yuan against the US dollar. And with that, we end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, for all your ongoing support. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, spread the word, help us grow the channel, because at the end of the day, never has it been more important for everyone to be informed and absolutely not entertained. And with that, I'll say goodbye.